Hi, my name is Emily. I still remember that day as if it happened just yesterday, even though it was back in 1979. At the time, I was living in Northern Virginia, feeling on top of the world. I had my first apartment, a beat up Chevy Vega that I could call my own, and a sense of freedom that only comes with being young and independent. Life was unfolding before me in the way I had always dreamed, full of new experiences, excitement, and the rush of being an adult. I had my sights set on modeling and surrounded myself with friends, laughter, and a string of boyfriends. To say I felt invincible would be an understatement, but there was one day that would forever alter the course of my life. It was a bright April afternoon, the kind of day that makes you want to seize the moment and do something spontaneous. So, I decided to go horseback riding, a simple activity, one I had done before, but never with great skill. I made my way to Centerville, Virginia, where I had taken riding lessons in the past. I hired a horse for a couple of hours, threw on a pair of jeans, a light blue Indian cotton shirt, and headed out. The breeze on my skin felt like freedom, and for that short time, I was lost in the beauty of the world around me. The ride began perfectly fine. I was following two others, and the three of us decided to race. My horse, eager and full of energy, went from a canter to a fast gallop. At first, I thought I could control it. I had ridden enough to know the ropes, but the terrain quickly became unpredictable. I could feel the horse's body shifting beneath me, and my grip tightened on the reins. But as the horse pushed forward, something in me began to panic. A horrible sense of dread washed over me, the kind that grips you when you know something is terribly wrong. The ground seemed to rise up to meet me, and my horse stumbled. I could feel myself being thrown off, but in that moment, time seemed to freeze. In what felt like an instant, I was no longer on the horse. I wasn't even in my body anymore. It's hard to explain, but it felt as though I had been torn from reality and thrown into another dimension. I wasn't aware of the physical pain of the impact, the rocks, or the ditch that I was about to land in. I didn't even know that I had died in that moment. I had left my body before it could happen. When I left my body, everything changed in an instant. It was so abrupt that I couldn't process it at first. One moment, I was in the world I knew, everything tangible, every sensation familiar, and the next, I was no longer in that reality. The shock of it was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was as though I had been ripped out of my own life and placed into something entirely foreign. It was a profound awakening, and the first emotion that washed over me was not peace, but a crushing sense of fear. I realized immediately that I was no longer in the physical world. The emotions that followed were overwhelming: fear, isolation, dread, and an intense grief. I was struck with a deep sadness that I had lost everything that once defined me. My identity, the core of who I was, had vanished. All of the things I once took for granted, my body, my life, my sense of control, were gone, leaving nothing but a vast, unknown emptiness. As I moved through this strange dimension, I passed through a tunnel. It's the sort of thing people speak about when they share near-death experiences. They talk about seeing a light, feeling peace, and being bathed in joy. But my experience wasn't like that. I didn't see a welcoming light, nor did I feel the serenity others often describe. I think the abruptness of the accident had something to do with it. There was no time to prepare, no gradual transition. It was as though everything just stopped in an instant. I've since reflected on how people describe their experiences in these other realms. For many, there is a sense of a comforting presence, a guiding force, or even the embrace of loved ones who've passed. For me, it wasn't like that at first. I was aware of the vastness around me, yet it felt isolating. The tunnel was dark, thick with velvet-like substance, but in a way that was dense and almost suffocating. It wasn't warm or comforting, it was merely there. And in that space, I felt an absence of physical pain. I didn't experience the aches and bruises I might have expected, but I did feel something else, a strange sense of magnificence. I didn't know if I still had a body. In that moment, the idea of checking for my limbs seemed irrelevant. I didn't feel the need to confirm if I had a physical form anymore. All that mattered was that I was there. I wasn't bound by the rules of the physical world anymore. The struggles, the pain, the burdens of daily life, they simply didn't exist in that moment. It was as though everything had paused, and I was floating in the present. In this non-physical state, I was suspended in a form of being that was difficult to explain. I wasn't aware of time, and yet I was acutely aware of everything around me. Time, as we know it in the physical world, had no relevance. It was as if I was existing outside of it, where everything was simultaneous. No past, no future, only the present. The experience defied the very language I had to describe it. There were no words to capture the feeling of pure existence, of being freed from the constraints of time and space. I thought about a passage from the Bible in 1 Corinthians 13:12. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known. It's as if that verse spoke to my very experience. Here in this dimension, I was seeing through a glass, but it wasn't a glass. It was a complete removal of all the things that limited me in the physical world. My mind was open to understanding something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. The absence of physical pain was a relief, but it wasn't the most striking thing I encountered. What was most astonishing was the profound sense of being connected to everything. I felt like I was part of something vast, something much greater than myself. And there, in that place, I understood that our physical struggles, our pains, our fears, are momentary, but the essence of who we are, the love we give, the connections we make, that is eternal. The feeling of magnificence I had wasn't one of self-importance. It was more of a recognition that I was part of something bigger, something greater than I had ever understood. As I reflected on this, I thought about the words in Matthew 11:28-30, where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." In that moment, I understood what it meant to truly rest, not just physically, but spiritually, to be free from the burdens of life. I may not have seen the bright light or felt an overwhelming sense of joy in the way others describe, but I experienced something far deeper, a realization that there is more to life than we can see with our eyes. The world we live in is only one layer of a far greater reality. What we do with our lives here, the love we share, the way we live in this physical world, ripples out into eternity. And once we let go of the physical and step into the spiritual, all of those things become clear. When I was 12 years old, my grandfather passed away, and it shook me to the core. His death from cancer was painfully slow, and watching him suffer through those final months left a scar that stayed with me for years. I had always been incredibly close to him. He was the one I looked up to, the one who guided me with a quiet strength. To me, he was everything. The loss felt like a part of my world had been ripped away, and I couldn't fathom life without him. But then something happened that I never could have anticipated. During my experience beyond this life, I encountered him again. It wasn't just a memory or a fleeting vision. It was him, truly him. The man I had known from my childhood, the man who was there to comfort me when I needed it most. He didn't appear as some youthful, vibrant figure. No, he was the same person I had said goodbye to all those years ago. The man who had lived through the struggles, the years, and the cancer was still there, and somehow he found me. To see him again was nothing short of emotional. It's one thing to miss someone, to mourn them, but it's another entirely to know that they still exist, somewhere, in some way. And the most astonishing part? The love he had felt for me when he died, the deep bond we shared, was just as strong as it had ever been. That connection hadn't faded with time or distance. It was still real. It was still alive. In that moment, I understood something that I hadn't truly grasped before, that love transcends death. It's not bound by the limitations of time or space. My grandfather's love for me had not only survived death, but it had found its way back to me, and it was as if he was still looking out for me, just as he had when I was a child. The reassurance that love endures beyond our earthly existence was a lesson I took with me. It's a truth that has stayed with me ever since. But there were deeper lessons to come. In the life review that followed, I saw things that were difficult to process. It wasn't like being judged by someone else. There was no figure of authority casting down sentences. Instead, I became my own critic. I relived moments of my life, moments when I had hurt others, times when I had been short, rude, or inconsiderate. I felt their pain, their frustration, as if I were living their experience. I also felt the joy and gratitude from the times I had shown kindness, when my actions had brought happiness to someone else. The whole experience was overwhelming. I realized that everything we do, from the smallest gesture to the biggest decision, matters. There's no such thing as a harmless action. When you're caught in the rush of daily life, it's easy to forget how your words and actions affect others. But in that life review, it became clear that every moment, every choice, carries weight. The smallest act of kindness can ripple out in ways we may never understand. Conversely, a careless word or an unkind deed can cause harm far beyond what we can imagine. I thought of the Bible verse from Galatians 6:7, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows." It was as if this verse came alive in that moment. The life review showed me that every action, whether positive or negative, has a consequence. We may not always see it right away, but the ripples of what we do in this life stretch far beyond our own understanding. And it wasn't just the big moments that mattered. The day-to-day choices, the interactions with strangers, the way we treat the people closest to us, they all add up. It became clear that our lives are not just about the grand gestures or the significant events. They are about the sum of our daily actions, the small acts of love and kindness that we may take for granted. It's easy to get lost in the chaos of life and forget that every interaction is an opportunity to create something beautiful or to leave a mark on someone else's life. I also understood that the love we give is not just a fleeting thing. It's something that stays with the people we leave behind. Even after we're gone, that love continues to ripple outward, affecting lives in ways we might never see. And in the same way, the pain we cause can have lasting effects. The life review wasn't just about seeing what I had done. It was about understanding the depth of how my actions had touched others, for better or worse. It was a sobering realization, but also one that pushed me to be more mindful of how I lived moving forward. I think back on the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10:25-37, where a man is robbed and left for dead on the side of the road. Several people pass by, but it is the Samaritan, someone society would least expect, who stops to help. Jesus tells us that the Samaritan's actions were a model of love and compassion. In that story, it's not the grand gestures that matter. It's the willingness to act with kindness in the face of adversity. It's the little things that make all the difference. The experience beyond this life taught me that nothing in this world is insignificant. Every moment, every choice, every interaction matters. And while death may take us from this world, it doesn't take the love we've shared or the impact we've had. That is eternal, and it's up to us to choose how we spend our time here, to decide what kind of legacy we want to leave behind. As I looked back on my life during the review, one thought kept echoing in my mind: how have I treated others? In that moment, it felt as though every action, every word, every choice I made was laid out before me like a clear reflection. The idea that life is a sort of bill at the end resonated deeply. Everything comes back to how we've treated people, and I knew that if I had been cruel or careless, my life review would be a hellish experience. It wouldn't just be a summary of events, it would be a painful reminder of everything I had done wrong. Every moment when I had failed to show kindness or understanding would have burned brightly in that review. But that wasn't the case for me. Sure, there were regrets. There were times when I wasn't my best self, when I let my mood or stress spill over onto others. But I also saw moments where I had done right, times when I had stepped up when it mattered. One memory that stood out was when I befriended a girl who was being bullied at school. I wasn't a popular kid, but I took it upon myself to protect her, to stand in between the bullies and offer a kind word when she needed it most. I saw the difference it made in her life, and in that moment I understood the profound impact of even the smallest act of kindness. It wasn't just grand gestures that counted. In fact, it was the little things, the everyday kindnesses, that truly stood out in my review. One of the most vivid memories was when I found a lost cat and returned it to a little girl. It wasn't a life-altering act, but the gratitude in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. These small moments are the ones that shape the course of our lives and the lives of others. In the grand scheme of things, they're far from small. They are huge, monumental even. I thought about what the Bible says in Matthew 25:40. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. That verse struck me during my life review. It reminded me that how we treat others, even those who seem insignificant in the eyes of the world, is of utmost importance. Every person, no matter their status, is worthy of kindness. Every small act of love, every effort to help, counts in ways we may never fully understand. As I continued through this life review, I felt a shift inside me. I began to understand what truly matters in life. It's not about the career success, the money, or the accolades. It's about the people we affect, the way we make others feel, and how we can lift others up. I had always thought the worst thing I could do was fail in the eyes of society. But after experiencing this review, I realized that the worst thing I could do is hurt someone else's destiny. To interfere with another's path, to cause them pain or suffering, is the gravest thing I could imagine. I realized then that kindness is everything. It's the most important thing we can offer. It doesn't take a saint to make a difference in someone's life. It just takes a willingness to show up, to be present, to be kind, and to listen. I'm not perfect, and I've made mistakes, plenty of them, but I strive to do better. I try not to take out my bad days on others. I try to be the person who lifts others up instead of tearing them down. Through all the anguish of my life review, my grandfather was there, offering comfort. His presence reminded me of the importance of love and support in this life, and how those things transcend the boundaries of time. His wisdom was a beacon that guided me through the hardest parts of my reflection. Ultimately, what I learned is simple yet profound. Life is about how we treat each other. We are all connected, and our actions ripple out far beyond what we can see. The choices we make, whether big or small, are what define us. So, when you look at your own life, ask yourself, How are you treating the people around you? Are you uplifting them? Are you leaving a positive impact on their journey? Because that is the true measure of a life well lived. The non physical reality I encountered was unlike anything I could have ever imagined. It was so thought responsive that it felt like my mind was shaping the very fabric of the space around me. The first moment I realized this was when the thought of the tree of life crossed my mind. It wasn't the tree from biblical stories, but in that realm, it felt just as real. A magnificent white tree appeared before me, its surface textured and radiant. It was a simple thought, yet it manifested instantly in the form of this beautiful tree. That experience showed me just how powerful our thoughts are in non physical reality. Here, your mind creates your surroundings almost instantly. I quickly realized how important it was to be mindful of what I thought while I was out of my body. In the physical world, we are limited by time and space, but here, thoughts shaped everything. There were layers within this reality, each less dense than the last. It was like traveling down a superhighway, passing through dimensions that became more ethereal, more responsive to thought, until I reached a point where everything seemed to dissolve into pure energy. During my life review, though, I was still deeply connected to my life on Earth. I hadn't yet fully embraced the idea that I was no longer part of the physical world. The hope and attachment I had to my life on Earth kept me grounded, making it hard for me to accept the truth of my situation. But in that space, my grandfather was there to comfort me. His presence was a steadying force, soothing my heart. He seemed to understand that I wasn't ready to let go yet. He stood beside me, trying to help me find peace, even as I struggled with the idea of leaving behind the life I had known. I also knew I had a choice to make. I could return to my life, or I could stay in this new existence. I remember a blonde woman's voice telling me that returning to the physical world would be difficult. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a path I had to choose. Life on Earth, she warned, would be hard, and I would face struggles. But somehow, her words didn't deter me. I still held on to the hope that life there held meaning, that there was something important I still had to do. In non-physical reality, time doesn't exist in the same way it does here. The life review, though it felt like an eternity, occurred in an instant. The experience had many layers, and just beyond the physical world was a reality that mirrored ours. But it was less dense. It was as though you could die in your home, and in non-physical reality, you could still feel like you were there. It's a strange concept to grasp, but I think that's why some people mistakenly think they encounter ghosts or lingering spirits. Perhaps they're trapped in that less dense layer. But what truly struck me was when I traveled even further down that superhighway into realms far beyond what I had ever expected. I burst into a space filled with souls, floating in a sea of love and light. It wasn't heaven, though it felt profoundly peaceful. There was a brightness, as though there was a sun, but no actual sun. Music, beautiful, soothing waves of sound, drifted through this space, comforting me and filling me with a sense of serenity I can't fully explain. As I floated there, I realized something powerful. The souls around me were parts of me, fragments of my being. At first, I wasn't sure how to understand this. I'd never been a strong believer in reincarnation, but in that moment, it became clear. These were different personalities, different facets of my soul, existing in harmony. It was a lot to process, but it opened my eyes to a deeper understanding of existence. I didn't stay there long, just a brief moment, a glimpse, really. But in that short time, I felt a joy and love so intense, so overwhelming, that I could only describe it as coming home. It wasn't heaven, but something much deeper, something that felt like my true source. It was as though I had been reunited with a part of me that I had always known but never fully understood. That experience was transformative. I realized that what we perceive as heaven might not be what we think. Heaven, as we understand it, might only be a reflection of something even more profound, returning to the source, the place from which we all came. And though I couldn't stay, I now know that it wasn't the end. It was just another chapter in an eternal journey. In that moment, it felt as though I was suddenly thrust back into another dimension. And there he was, my grandfather. This place was different from anything I could have imagined. It wasn't the physical world, but it was close, so close that it almost felt familiar. The air was soft and light, and the space had a mauve hue to it. There was ground beneath me, but no solid floor, as though I was floating in a boundless, weightless expanse. It was surreal, and there he was, standing in front of me, looking just like the man I had loved and lost years ago. I was struck by the beauty of the moment, but something else was also sinking in. This was not where I was meant to stay. No one told me I had to go back, but I knew it was time. My grandfather didn't need to say a word for me to understand that. I didn't have a choice. The fear that washed over me at the thought of leaving this place was overwhelming. I had just learned so much, experienced so much, and the idea of returning to a life where things seemed so trivial felt impossible. It was as though everything I had come to understand in that moment would fade away. As I stood there with my grandfather, I felt something strange happening. It was as if pieces of the wisdom, the lessons, and the experiences were being pulled away from me, one by one. I felt like I was losing something vital, something precious. I turned to my grandfather and said, "This has been so long. I know there's so much I can't tell you, so much that's being removed from my memory right now." It was as if there were layers upon layers of knowledge that were slipping through my fingers, and no matter how hard I tried to hold on, they were being taken away from me. I was filled with a deep sorrow, a sense of grief that I can't even fully explain. It wasn't just the sadness of leaving a beautiful and profound space, but the heartbreak of knowing that I couldn't bring everything back with me. It felt like trying to hold water in your hands. Everything I had learned, everything I had understood, was slipping away. I wanted to claw it all back, to push it into my mind and keep it there, but I couldn't. Perhaps it was too much for my human mind to comprehend, or maybe it was simply not meant to be remembered in the way I wanted. I don't know, but in that moment, the sense of loss was so real, and it left me feeling empty, like a part of me had been torn away. Despite the sadness, I knew my grandfather was there for me. His empathy was palpable, and though he didn't want me to stay in that place, he wanted me to return to finish my life, to complete what I had started. But there was more to it. I had a sense deep in my heart that he wanted me to go back not just for myself, but to tell his wife, my grandmother, that he loved her, that he was at peace, and that everything was okay. I felt like I was a messenger for him, a conduit between two worlds, and yet the thought of returning to my life felt almost unbearable. There weren't enough tears in the ocean to express how much I didn't want to leave, but in that moment of heartache, I felt myself being pulled away. It was as though my body was moving backward, drawn through the tunnel once again. It wasn't gentle, it was a forceful pull, and with a sudden jolt, I was back in the physical reality. The transition was jarring, like being yanked back into a world that no longer made sense. I couldn't bring everything back with me, but there was one thing I carried: the overwhelming love and peace I had felt, the certainty that life, in all its messiness, has purpose. Even in the deepest moments of sorrow, there's a reason to keep going. My grandfather's love, his message, and the lessons I had learned stayed with me, even though so much had been taken away. That experience, though fleeting, changed everything. It reminded me that we are more than our bodies, more than our struggles, and that love transcends all dimensions of existence. When I returned to physical reality, it was like being thrust back into a world I no longer understood. I didn't take it well at all. I looked up at the two men who had resuscitated me, the ones who had saved my life, and I saw the concerned faces of a group of people standing around. There was an ambulance waiting to take me to the hospital, but all I could feel was pain. Every inch of my body ached. I couldn't help but look around the field, and in that moment I thought, this isn't real. This can't be real. I knew where I had been, the place I had just left, that peaceful, infinite space. That was the true reality. This, the physical world, felt like nothing more than a temporary stop, a brief detour on our journey. I had just been shown the beauty and depth of the universe, and here I was, back in a body that was broken and battered, surrounded by a world that felt shallow and disconnected from everything I had experienced. I realized then that we are only visitors here. This life is temporary. We're just passing through. I had been touched by something far greater than this reality, and it left me with an aching sense of loss. I had learned something profound, something that changed me completely, and I could feel it slipping away, piece by piece. On the way to the hospital, I passed out. I didn't leave my body again, but I fainted from the immense shock my body had endured. The doctors later confirmed that I had a massive concussion, a broken nose, which to this day is still crooked, a broken finger, and bruises all over my body. I was in bad shape, but my helmet had saved my life. I'm convinced that without it, I wouldn't be here today. When I arrived at Fairfax Hospital, I saw my mother, who worked there. She rushed to my side, concerned but also trying to comfort me. They ran a series of x-rays and exams, and I began to try and explain to the doctor what had happened, about my near-death experience, the place I had been, and everything I had felt. But his reaction was not what I had hoped for. His expression shifted from compassion to disgust in an instant. He folded his arms and asked, "What drugs have you taken?" I was stunned. "I haven't taken any drugs," I replied. "I had an accident. This is what happened during the accident, and I don't understand why I'm here." The doctor didn't seem to care. His judgment was immediate and harsh. He insisted that my experience must have been a drug-induced hallucination, dismissing everything I had just been through. I was distraught. I couldn't believe how quickly he dismissed my words, how he refused to even entertain the idea that I had experienced something real, something life-changing. My mother, thankfully, stepped in. She knew me better than anyone and said if she had been on drugs, she'd be the first to tell you. She had a severe head injury. You need to admit her. I felt utterly helpless. The urgency I felt, the knowledge that there was something incredibly important I needed to share, was overwhelming. But the doctor wasn't listening. He had already made up his mind, and all I wanted in that moment was to go home. I wanted to leave that sterile clinical environment behind and go back to the peace I had briefly known. I didn't belong there anymore. I had seen too much to return to a world so wrapped in disbelief and skepticism. In that moment, I was reminded of a verse from the Bible, 2 Corinthians 5:1. "For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands." That verse resonated with me in a way it never had before. I knew deep in my soul that I had glimpsed that eternal house, that true reality, and I wasn't ready to let go of it. But as much as I longed to hold on to that experience, I had to return to this world. It was my journey, and it wasn't over yet. I didn't have the words to explain what had happened to me, and no one could understand it in that moment, least of all the doctor. but I knew what I had felt. I knew the truth. Even though I was back in this broken body, a part of me had already transcended, and nothing could ever take that away. The aftermath of my near-death experience was profound. For hours, I felt an overwhelming need to express love, to say the things I had never said. I had to tell my grandmother I loved her and my boyfriend how deeply I cared. But the biggest change was an internal shift, an urgent understanding that I couldn't ignore. Then everything collided with the harshness of reality. The doctor dismissed my experience as a hallucination, humiliating me in front of the nurses. His cruel words shattered me. On the drive home, feeling lost, I even tried to open the car door while it was moving, as if I had lost everything again. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the emotional and spiritual anguish of being rejected by the world I had returned to. When I got home, I locked myself in my room, too overwhelmed to tell anyone what had happened. I feared no one would believe me. This became my secret, a profound part of me that felt too big for others to understand. It felt like losing my grandfather again, in a different way, and the grief was nearly unbearable. But then there was the woman with blonde hair who had warned me life would be difficult. She was right. Soon after, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and my life became a series of struggles. But even in the hardships, I held on to one truth: love transcends death. Kindness, compassion, love, they matter beyond this life. For the first time, I understood true peace with death. My fear of it was diminished, and I knew I would be reunited with my loved ones. This thought brought me great comfort. I shared this with my grandmother, who revealed that my great-grandmother had psychic abilities, using them to heal others. This connection to the past deepened my understanding that love transcends generations, a truth that changed me forever. Despite the physical pain of the accident, what I learned was invaluable. I was able to offer comfort to my parents before they passed, helping them find peace about the afterlife. I now see that near-death experiences open us to a greater level of consciousness, allowing us to comfort others in their own journeys. This experience taught me an important lesson. Life is not about escaping, but living it fully, with love and kindness. Our purpose is to help others and be the best version of ourselves. I now understand the lessons my mother taught me. Love and kindness are the core of life's purpose. That's the gift my near-death experience gave me. The realization that life is about learning, growing, and loving. So, through everything I've experienced, I've realized that life is not just about what we see, but also about what we can't see. The deep lessons each of us must learn. I've touched a different world, where love, connection, and truth are eternal. And if you're seeking peace, understanding, or a fulfilling life, there's one thing that's clear. God's love is always ready to welcome you, to guide you on the right path. If my story has touched your heart, if you felt something in your soul, I urge you to share this video, comment below to let me know your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss any messages that God blesses us with. Let these lessons change your life. Remember, your life has purpose, and God's love is present in every moment. Open your heart and walk in that light.